Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar on mental illness and emotional well-being, especially in the workplace. My name is Gary Scow. I work with DHRM, and I will be kind of moderating the webinar today. A little bit of housekeeping as we get started here. Those of you who have used Zoom before, you're probably familiar with all of the functionality of it. Those of you who may be new to Zoom, down in the bottom of the window, you'll see there are some buttons available. One of those is a live transcript or closed captioning. If you want to activate that so that you can get a live transcript of the speaking that's going on, that'll be available to you. The questions, the Q&A has been disabled for this webinar. All of the questions for today's webinar have been asked by participants previously, and so we'll try to get through as many of those questions as possible. Also, there will be a recording of this webinar available on the Center for Excellence website in the next couple of days. So those of you who want to review this again, or for those who are not able to attend live, that will be available for future viewing as well. There will also be some resources, some references mentioned during the webinar, and we will provide those to participants as well, a handout at the conclusion of the webinar. So to begin with, I'd just like to share some statistics about mental health. This comes from Psych Hub Mental Health Education and the Society for Human Resource Management. It says that mental health accounts for more years of life lost than any other conditions, including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and respiratory diseases. It's projected that mental illness will reach $6 trillion annual cost by 2030. 1 in 5 Americans experience mental illness each year. 7% of Americans experience substance abuse. Each year, 1 million Americans attempt suicide. 8 million Americans suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. 11 million American adults have had at least one depressive episode, and 40 million American adults have experienced anxiety. Governor Cox's executive order that provides state employees with 4 annuals for mental health draws worthy attention to this issue. We're talking about mental wellness in the workplace today. For folks unfamiliar with addressing these issues or seeking treatment, there are a lot of questions. We're joined today by 2 experts in the field of mental health. They'll address some of the questions that we've received. Kim Myers has a Master of Social Work and is the Assistant Director of Utah's Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health in the Department of Human Services. You heard from Kim on the release of the executive order in a video about caring for yourself and others in the workplace. Kim spent a number of years as the state suicide prevention administrator and chair of the Utah Suicide Prevention Coalition. Curtis Wilcox is a licensed clinical social worker from Blomquist Hale. He has worked in both inpatient and outpatient settings, including inpatient psychiatric and detox units. He has also worked for the Neurobehavior Home Program as a therapist for individuals with developmental disabilities, and he is currently working for Blomquist Hale as a clinical trainer and on-site crisis therapist. Welcome, Kim and Chris. Thank you for being with us today. Questions for this webinar have been submitted by today's participants. Several of the questions address similar topics, so they've been consolidated. For those questions regarding specific situations or treatments, we encourage you to seek assistance using the resources presented today. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible in the hour we have available today. One of the most frequent questions we received was knowing when to seek professional help. Do you have any advice for folks who are asking when it's time to seek professional assistance?
Sure. So I'll jump in here kind of to get started. I think for me, you can look diagnostically when it's time to seek help, but I think anytime when you're feeling like overwhelmed and extra support can be helpful is a good time to seek help. There's no exact right time. The only time we don't want it to seek help is when it's too late, right? And so the earlier we can intervene in mental illness, in life stressors, the earlier we can learn new ways to cope, new ways to deal with, the situations going on, I think the better. So if you're questioning it, I think that's a good time to seek help.
Okay. For what kinds of issues do people commonly seek treatment?
So people, really seek treatment for a range of mental health and substance use related issues. And that could be relationship problems, just conflict or problems within a relationship, situational stress, all the way up to like a diagnosable sort of mental illness or substance use disorder. So when trying to understand sort of where we are at with what we're experiencing, where it falls in that continuum of, stressors to illness, we would encourage folks to do like a self-assessment or get an assessment from a provider to be able to kind of understand what they're experiencing. So an assessment will basically look at your symptom severity. So how severe are the symptoms that you're experiencing, as well as the way it's impacting your life, your daily functioning, your ability to, take care of your responsibilities, to work, to be in relationships, all those things. So you can see like a primary care provider or a therapist, or you can do an online confidential screener and do kind of a self-screening at healthymindutah.org.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's, obviously there's quite a few different mental health pathologies or disorders that people seek help for. And that's why we have such a variety of services out there that, we might be talking about in a little bit. I just want to plug it in there as well that with Blomquist Hale, what we say is we don't necessarily have to find that element of a diagnosis or something that an insurance company is going to look at and say, okay, you're approved to be, financed for this service. We will help with whatever you're coming in for. That's one of our models, is that we are here to help with any of life's challenges, whatever it might be. And I've seen that as I've worked as a therapist with Blomquist Hale, is people come in with a variety of needs, and we work hard at finding interventions to help them and get them going with whatever direction they want with their goals. So I think there's a variety of services, and if something's a struggle, reach out, seek help, regardless of whether you're like, well, I'm not that bad off, right? Like, I'm not like this person here who's so depressed they can't get out of bed. Don't do that comparison. If something's a struggle, please seek support.
Thank you. So when we say get assistance, what does that look like? And what are some of the treatment options that are available?
Great question. So there's a variety of treatment options available. I'll just do kind of a brief rundown of it. So when we talk about getting assistance, it's really just getting connected with some kind of support, something that's going to help you address a problem. It can range from anything to being like a self-help book, right? Something you can pick up and do on your own. And that can be assistance in and of itself. And for a lot of people, that's enough. But there's other services as well, other ways to get assistance, including the things that we're talking about with getting help with a therapist, being able to get the support through addressing specific concerns by talking to somebody. If we look at the range, right, I think at the most basic level, we've got outpatient therapy, which is talking to a therapist about every 2 to 4 weeks. There's intensive outpatient therapy, where if a concern is really intense and acute and it's causing a lot of problems, somebody may qualify for seeing a therapist multiple times a week, which would be that intensive outpatient therapy piece. There's day treatment, where for 1 or more days a week, you are in treatment for hours on end. And then there's also, inpatient hospitalization for our most acute needs when something is in a mental health crisis. So within each of those, they're going to have their own models and their own approaches to help address mental health needs. And because there are hundreds of different ways to tackle mental health concerns, oftentimes it's about finding a model that works for you once you've identified the level of care you need. If you know there's something specific, like if someone has said you are diagnosed with OCD, you can look for something specific that says we specialize in that. Otherwise, most therapists are trained and ready to help with a variety of concerns.
I'll just add that kind of, if you really think about what treatment sort of looks like, what what mental health support looks like, there's probably, besides the three most common, and Curtis talked about outpatient treatment, so having an appointment where you go talk to a therapist and get that treatment there, but also with your primary care doctor, there's medication management. So medication is very common. I think, Gary, you said some of those statistics kind of leading into that. And I think the most really important takeaway from all of those statistics, the 1 in 5 of us will experience a mental health, a mental illness in any given year, is experiences, challenges with mental health are the norm, right? It's something that all of us, probably without exception, experience at some point in their life. And then obviously there are folks who have chronic, mental illness that need sort of that longer term care. But so medication is really common, outpatient treatment, and then also know that there's crisis resources available. So 24/7, you can call the Utah Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. And soon that'll be switching to a 3-digit line to be much easier to remember. But crisis is always available as well.
That's a great point, Kim. I think it's good to look at it. My favorite way of looking at it is like being able to get services, whether it's medication that's indicated or seeing a therapist, like that stuff that at any point somebody may benefit from, right? Like obviously there may be more acute needs, but especially with therapy, like everybody at some point is actually going to benefit from therapy in their life. But then there just may be some that actually severely need it without being able to move forward.
Thank you. You both kind of touched on some of the treatments involving medication. Are there workplace cautions for folks being treated with medication as part of their therapies?
I think certainly with any medication, it's a risk benefit analysis that you work on directly with your prescriber and have that conversation. But medication is largely very safe and very effective and very common. So.
Thank you. So for folks who may have been dissatisfied with treatment in the past, there seem to be some new or alternative approaches emerging all the time. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, I think when you think about people who have been dissatisfied with treatment in the past, I have a colleague who shared this in a training, and it really stuck with me. And she said, she asked the group, had anybody had a bad haircut? And I went back to the day when I'm trying to color my hair and it turned bright orange and it looked terrible. And I was like, yeah, we've had bad hair moments. And she was like, well, if you had a bad haircut, does that mean you'd never get a haircut again? Or would you just find a new place to get a haircut? And so if you've been dissatisfied with treatment in the past, it's a great time to try something else and not just give up on it, right? Because not every therapist, not every provider is going to be the right fit for you, and not every treatment is going to be the right fit for you either. So there are definitely emerging sciences, around treating mental health and substance use disorders all of the time. So one of the things that's been such a game changer sort of in the world of substance use disorder is medication. So medication assisted treatment that helps people stay off drugs that they might have been addicted to or dependent on. So that's that's really changed a lot of the game in addiction treatment. But there's emerging sciences that come out all of the time. I think the best approach here is to ask a lot of questions about what you want to get out of treatment, how the provider defines treatment goals and successes, and what kind of training and support the provider gets for certain modalities that meet the goals that you have for your own treatment.
I love those points, Kim. The one thing I would add on to that is just therapy should be, I'm not going to say it always will be, but it should be a relationship where you can be honest, where you're not super concerned about what is this going to hurt the therapist's feelings, should I or shouldn't I provide feedback? Please provide feedback. It's one of the tools we use moving forward to try to make treatment as productive and effective as we can. And so I would say if you've had a bad experience, feel free to share that with another therapist. Say, you know what, this happened in the last therapist I saw, and I didn't like that, and let them know that, along with the stuff Kim was bringing up about goals and what you're hoping to get out of the therapy.
Thank you. Are there any agencies or facilities that have on-site mental health counselors available to employees?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I know with Blomquist Hale, I believe the only state agency, and I might be wrong, but I think the only state agency that has a regular on-site therapist would be the state hospital. However, if you feel like that would be something that's beneficial, if you feel like having somebody that is on site that you and your coworkers would benefit from having on a weekly basis there, I would say bring that up to your supervisor, let your HR representative know that, so that they can start evaluating the benefits of having somebody on site. The other thing I would add to that is we do provide on-site crisis support. So when there is a crisis event, whether it be actually while on the job, or I've had several where a coworker has passed away, or a family member of a coworker, and we're just showing up to help everyone in the agency know how to address that. Those are all things we do provide, and that is a therapist coming to the workplace and helping with those kind of things.
Yeah, we've had really, really great success with having an on-site provider who really knows the state hospital and some of the certain challenges that go with working there. So that's been really successful. So yeah, I would say if that's something people are looking for, talk to your directors, talk to HR, and Blomquist Hale has been really accommodating, and it's been really great. I think the easiest way, that a lot of people are getting, counseling services right now is telehealth. And in that sense, Blomquist Hale is available on site, to anyone who has the technology.
Yeah. Anyone that is looking for that easy access, feel free to call Blomquist Hale and we'll get you scheduled right away. All our therapists are ready to help with Zoom, as well as in office, but we do Zoom and even telephone calls, because we know some people, they're even more comfortable with telephone calls.
Great, thank you. How does a person go about finding a therapist, and what should I be looking for in terms of a good fit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not going to pretend like this is an easy process, because it can be really challenging. There's not, a lot of really good information sort of out there. My dream is that we build like a match sort of .com type thing, so where you can kind of find a good fit for a therapist. So we'll work on that. But my main feedback here is if you're willing to talk openly with friends and family, getting a direct referral is really useful to somebody that has trusted and has had a good experience with. Beyond that, my other main feedback would be ask the provider a lot of questions. I think sometimes we don't feel empowered as the person seeking help to ask the provider a lot of questions. I think they're the one that's going to come in and ask us questions and figure stuff out. But it's totally appropriate for you to ask the provider questions. So questions on cost. What kind of insurance do you take? What's the cost per session? What's your no-show or cancellation policy? Tell me about your worldview and your approach to therapy, your approach to counseling services. What's the model that you use to produce change? How does religion or lack of religion play into how you provide services? How does it kind of shape your therapeutic approach? How do we form goals? What's your process for that? How do you measure success? Ask about their qualifications. So talk about, okay, what's your licensure? What's your training certificates? What specializations do you have? Just like within kind of the medical realm, there's a lot of therapists that are kind of generalists, like a primary care would be, but then there are providers who have a lot of, specialization, might be very good at treating people who have experienced multiple traumas or people who have experienced certain types of abuse, right? So find out what people's specialties are and what's their use of like evidence-based practices. And then what's the setting like? Do you do in person? Do you do virtual? How often do you recommend people go in treatment? Walk me through what a typical session would look like, right? So tell me about your approach and ask a lot of questions and then see if you can kind of find a connection with that approach and give it a go.
Yeah, just to add to what you're talking about, Kim, I think, back in, the even 50s or 60s, and even further from that, we see it sometimes in television too, but it's like this top-down approach where the therapist is the master and he's the one directing the sessions. And I think most therapists these days know that effective treatment comes from collaboration. And so you should feel like the relationship dynamics are not such that you are being talked down to, or that you are being belittled. Like, it should be a very collaborative process where you are both on a team tackling the goals you have for treatment.
Absolutely. You should be honored as the expert in your life and, walking a path together towards healing.
Thank you. So is it okay to switch if I don't like the direction my treatment is going?
100%. 100%. Yes, please. If it's not working for you, I think we like to assume that all treatment is either helpful or neutral. But there's definitely research out there that shows like treatment, whether it's not a good fit or whether the treatment isn't right for what you're experiencing or whatever other reasons, the treatment can cause harm. So if you don't feel good about what's happening, yes. It's also not, something that changes overnight. So if it's just frustration with, not, feeling better right away or being able to better manage your symptoms or your stressors right away, weigh those things. But yes, you can always change direction.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree 100%. And just two quick thoughts. One is, this is where feedback can become really important as well. So there was research in 2016 that's been developed and continually sustained that shows that therapists who are most effective are the ones who get feedback from clients about what's not working and what's working, and utilize that to move forward with the goals. So I think having that discussion and again being clear and honest is really important. The other thing to note is, if you're seeking services with Blomquist Hill specifically, most of us tend to be generalist. We have a lot of different certifications that we look at, and we all have backgrounds on our models and approaches, but always know that you can say this isn't working for me. And one of the things we provide is we don't say, well, okay, good luck. We try to help be an active partner in saying, okay, well, let's figure out what is going to be best for you and finding you the support and resources you need at that point.
Great. So are there specific services available for people with hearing impairments to find treatment with a provider that can effectively understand and communicate with them?
Yeah, so the Utah Division of Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing has some community support services that include some therapeutic services. There are some other, like the Sorensen Center, that have some of those services. Any provider should also be able to provide interpreter services at a bare minimum, right? I know that it's always great to communicate directly in the same language, but if nothing else, we should be having interpreter services. But I also just want to recognize that this is a gap. Culturally, linguistically, appropriate services are, can be hard to find. And so we've been doing a needs assessment within the State Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health in the community on behavioral health services for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So we're looking to really expand those services. So we'll definitely make announcements when that expansion happens.
Good. Are there specific services for first responders or others who may have experienced acute trauma?
Yeah, so there certainly are. At Blomquist Hale, we have a team that is trained and provides services for our first responders. Really, anyone who on a regular basis sees and has to manage crisis situations. We have a lot of different tools. The main model we use is called mind shielding. It's kind of a conglomerate of a lot of different models, but ultimately it helps individuals know how to manage both the emotional and physical aspect of being in that crisis, being able to shift gears when it comes to, having to be at home, and just how to really manage an acute stress response to, as much as possible, reduce PTSD developing. Knowing that always could be an outcome, we do not have, there's so much that influences PTSD. We do not have the ability to say this will guarantee that you never experience PTSD, but it can help reduce the risk. Outside of that, there are a lot of different models for addressing PTSD, which of course, first responders are at risk for developing. And just for clarification, that's usually 3 months after a traumatic event of having symptoms be maintained or worsen with an acute stress response. But when we're working with PTSD, there's a lot of different models. Usually they're going to be focused on helping to develop coping skills. There's going to be some process of exposure where you're helping your body do what's called habituate, where something becomes feeling more normal rather than constantly leading to an acute stress response. And then there's usually a lot of processes to address the beliefs and thoughts you have in regard to that event that are causing problems. So those are some of the things you can expect. There's also been some cool research on model methods that help with what they call implicit memory triggers, where instead of processing the event, you're just learning how to change those triggers, which implicit memory is just emotional trigger. It's different from when you remember your favorite Christmas and you can identify the events and the people and the smells and sounds. It's just your body reacting to an emotion based off of a trigger. So a lot of different dynamics and aspects to PTSD. Those are things that you can go out and look for. And when you come to Blomquist Hale, we will help you with those strategies. If you're needing more long-term care and PTSD treatment, we'll help you navigate understanding all the different models and what you can expect will come from those models of treatment.
Yeah, I'll just add, so unfortunately, trauma is a pretty common situation as well. People experience a lot of traumas, whether it's first responders, people who have experienced abuse. We're kind of in a collective trauma, right now to some extent. And so the bad news is it's pretty common. The good news is trauma treatment is incredibly effective if done well. And so I think that's really important to know. And so I'll just share a few more types of model. This is where when you ask what models do you use for treatment, that you can kind of see how well versed somebody might be for treating trauma. But there's a cognitive behavioral therapy for trauma, so CBT for trauma. There's a therapy called EMDR, which is very effective for trauma. It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So EMDR is how people will talk about it. There's for multiple traumas, cognitive processing therapy is incredibly effective. DBT, so dialectical behavioral therapy, is also effective for trauma. So those are another few examples where you can look for somebody who's specifically trained, and those have certifications that are required to be able to actually do those. And so you can ask about certifications as well.
Nice. Yeah, perfect. And just to clarify as well, when I talked about treatments that are targeted towards managing triggers rather than reprocessing the event. The main one is called sensory motor therapy, just to help clarify that. And then there are ones that are specific for just the exposure, that they call them exposure-based therapies. And those get more targeted towards helping you with habituation, which again, like when you're in a pool and it's cold at first, but as you stay in, you get more, it feels more normal. That's what it helps you to address.
Kind of along those same lines, are there specific services available for long-term caregivers who may be stretched by those unique stressors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mainly because like being a caregiver, that's something that's always going to be in the back of your mind, right? Even if you're not in the moment actively engaged in activities associated with being a caregiver. I think one of the best resources that we have access to would be a website. It's the coronavirus.utah.gov/mental health. I can send the link and we can include it in what's sent out to everybody. But in there, they have a list of a lot of different resources for support, both information on how to manage and balance out your life when you're dealing with that. But they also have resources for parents looking for support groups, looking for how they can get linked with people who are going through the same struggles. So I think those people who are in that long-term caregiver relationship, that would be one of the main things I would bring up is looking at that and seeing if there's something there that would help. Additional to that, of course, is knowing that once again, Blomquist Hale, we've been working with people in those roles for the whole pandemic, and it's something that is very common, comes up a lot. We can help in brainstorming specific to what somebody's situation is, ideas and possibilities that might be helpful for them. And so I would encourage anyone to look at that. We have a YouTube channel as well, and I'm going to reference it in another question later, but our YouTube channel, if you just type in Blomquist Hale and go to our YouTube channel, we've got a listing of tons of videos, and they're identified by the topic in their title. And there's things about parenting, caregiver burnout, stuff like that you can find there as well.
Thank you.
I'll add to just saying, okay, I think there's a couple ways we can interpret that sort of question, but if you're like a long-term caregiver to say, an aging parent with dementia, right? Or something like that, there are also like caregiver support groups where people with like experiences sort of come together and sometimes facilitated, sometimes peer-based, but there's a lot of good peer-to-peer people who are in these same type of experiences that are available, often through like an Alzheimer association or whatever the sort of illness or whatever the person is experiencing that you're a caregiver for, or there's a general caregiver support network as well.
Great. So you've both touched on kind of the pandemic and the way things have changed as far as how we work. Remote working and social isolation has taken a toll on many folks. So let's talk about some of those issues, maybe starting with general self-care. Are there recommendations for people to separate from stressful workplace situations so that doesn't interfere with the home life?
Yeah, this is tough it's been tough, right? And so I was thinking about this question, and I have a mentor that shares a quote when they talk about some of the challenges with work-life balance, which is not a real thing, but with like, how do we deal when we have really stressful workplace experiences or other kind of experience? And so there's a quote she shares that goes with like, the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And so I think many of us do the work that we do not expecting that it's not going to be challenging, right? We came into this work, whether you're, this kind of public service or whatever kind of role you're in, I think there's an expectation of challenge and difficulty. And that sometimes that's actually really protective, that the difficulty gives purpose, it gives satisfaction, it gives a sense of accomplishment, right? So it feeds us in some ways. Yet, right now, it's too much. And I just, doing really hard work in a multi-year global pandemic amongst many other challenges and stressors, like, we have announcements of school closures again this week. We've had all of this kind of reckoning on racism within our communities. Like, it's too much. And so if you feel like it's too much, you are correct, right? This is a lot. And hopefully that acknowledgement gives us permission to grant grace and love and support to ourselves and to those around us. And if you're in a supervisory role, to your employees, and vice versa, to your supervisor, right? Like, it is. So here we are, right? We're all in this crisis. Like, we are collectively in crisis to some extent, right? And so now what? So I'll give a few tips. Nothing's gonna, there's no magic sort of solution here, but I'll give a few tips that have helped me and that have been shared with me over time. So one is to really be thoughtful about your priorities. And another thing that kind of this mentor I mentioned always tells me is, when in doubt, choose relationships over tasks and over things. That is really important. Like, the more that we can engage in meaningful relationships, that will protect us from some of the stressors. When we're so prioritize relationships. Number two, when struggling with competing priorities and feeling like we're being pulled in all kinds of directions, this notion of building in margins. And what I mean by building in margins, that these are spaces between tasks and places that we set aside to de-stress, to collect our thoughts, to let go of one task and kind of start preparing for the next, and to just savor the good things in life, because there still are good things in life, right? And so build in those margins. I think we have really, like in our division, we have really encouraged staff to stop scheduling 60-minute meetings and doing 45, so that there's that margin. There's that 15-minute break in between where people can go on a walk, stretch, do some yoga, whatever that looks like. But just this back to back to back to back is not sustainable. And we need to build in strategies for those margins, for that kind of de-stressing. I would encourage folks to practice and engage in kind of a mindfulness practice. So pay attention to how you feel, to what the experience is, being in that moment, really paying attention to what serves you and what does not, and reacting appropriately, right? Like, so this is not serving me anymore, then we need to do more of this. And then the last thing is turn to others for assistance. Talk to people, reach out, engage. Like, this is a collective. We're all experiencing it singularly, but it is a collective experience, and people understand like the challenges of working from home. People understand the challenges of the pandemic. People are frustrated with, the political fighting over it, whatever that looks like. Reach out for assistance, find people who can support you, and you can kind of support in turn. So, I'll just, I guess, end my thoughts on this with one more quote from that this mentor shares. And it says, "In everybody's life, at some time, our inner fire goes out. It is then burst into flames by an encounter with another human being. And we should all be thankful for those people who rekindle the inner spirit." So we need to step up and be that for each other when we can, and seek it out when we need it.
Awesome, boys. I'm just going to add two really, really quick thoughts. The first is, understanding that the level of your stress and anxiety matters. So there's a point, it's about 100 beats per minute for your heart rate. At least that's the average for adults. When your body starts producing the hormones involved with getting into fight, flight, freeze mode. When you're in that mode, your best bet of getting out of that and being able to actually focus and be productive is distraction. There's an interesting book, if anyone wants to look at it, called Why Zebras Don't Get Hernias. It's about that concept. Zebras have the ability to, once they're out of the chase from a lion, shift gears and focus on eating and doing something that distracts them and calms them down. We need to have that ability to, when we are in fight, flight, freeze mode, when we're getting overwhelmed and stressed. I mean, you can even look at carrying around a little heart rate monitor right on your finger or something at work, but we need to be mindfully aware of that so that we know when it's time to step away from the stressful things and be 100% distracted from ruminating thoughts that are maintaining that level of stress and making us unproductive. The second thing is, I just want to reinforce mindfulness. I think that's an amazing skill. And a lot of people think mindfulness is a tool that you just bring out to feel better. Like you do a mindfulness exercise and then it's like, the world is better. The reality is, with mindfulness, sometimes it's going to make you feel more stressed. And that might make it sound like, well, why would I do it? We need to understand what the goal of mindfulness is. The goal of mindfulness is being able to train your brain to focus when you need it to. And that's what the exercises lead to, is that ability to say, I'm at work and I have this ability to focus on work. I'm at home, now I'm focused on home. And as you engage in mindfulness exercises, it's not just something you pull out when you're stressed. You do it regularly, just like going to the gym, so that your mind is trained to focus on what's in front of you in that moment.
Thank you. You talked about focusing on work, focusing on things away from work. With so many of us working from home, are there any suggestions that you have for actually separating home life and work life?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really difficult for people generally. We have kind of a culture that supports not doing that, right? And so this is, I think it's really critical, right? And it can be harder at home. And so my big thing here is boundaries. Like, we have to, for ourselves, set clear boundaries. So an example is having a clear start and stop time to your workday. And say if you have a home office, when that stop time comes, you close the door and you walk away. Or if you're in your kitchen, you put your computer away and don't pull it out again. And I understand, I truly do, that sometimes that is not the expectation of our workplaces, but it is up to us to set the boundaries that take care of our own mental well-being, right? And I think it's really important. And I think we can shift the culture, to a more sort of healthy place around those boundaries. I think it's good to do sometimes an activity that signals to your brain and your body that you are transitioning from, home to work and work to home. So something like, as soon as you're done, like, you go on a walk, or you leave the house and come back in, like you're coming back home from work. Maybe if what really was helpful for you is, you, on your 15-minute drive home, you used to listen to music, go sit in your car and listen to music for 10 minutes or whatever that looks like. Find some activities that signal this to you and be firm on your boundaries. Wherever those transition points that helped you before, think about building some of those back in, even if it seems silly, that you're not actually leaving your work building, getting in your car and driving home, or getting on tracks or whatever. Just build some of those transitions in so that you can kind of separate those things as you kind of transition into whatever the next part of your day is.
Thank you. Do you have any tips to combat brain fog and fatigue that can accompany long periods of isolation?
Sure, I can start on a few. There's no sort of magic type answers, and this is really, I think, rooted in the basics, right? So I think a lot of this is like back to the basics of health and well-being. So that's what I can offer, right? So aerobic exercise is really critical to combat brain fog, and overall just brain health. So whatever that looks like, it doesn't have to be intense aerobic exercise, but it does need to be kind of aerobic exercise. And maybe you have to start small, just a few minutes a day, but really needing to sort of build up to, or looking to build up to, that kind of 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Like, your brain health is very much associated with aerobic exercise. Healthy diet, right? So healthy fats, fruits and veggies, nuts and beans, whole grains, all of that, it has really strong associations with thinking, memory, and overall brain health. Avoid alcohol and drugs. It's, might feel helpful in the short term, but it is not helping. It is not helping your brain function at all. Sleep is really critical. I think, it goes back to it. Like, clinically, when I, would interact with folks, that was often one of my first questions, like, how much sleep do you get? You really can't take care of sort of other issues without getting good sleep. It just really impairs functioning in a lot of ways. It's a time to clear out toxins, time for rest, it's a time for rejuvenation. Other than that, like participating, you have, in social activities, this kind of ties into some of the other questions we have, but we are social creatures, and we are also in a pandemic. But it's not sustainable to be completely isolated physically, socially from other people. So finding the safest ways to sort of socialize with folks is really important for our mood, but also for our thinking and memory. So whether that's socially distanced mass walks with people, whatever that looks like for you, the idea that we can maintain complete isolation, COVID is not good for your health. Neither is total isolation. And then, I really love Georgia O'Keeffe, the artist. And one of her quotes is that she said, "Don't try to be happy in life, try to be interested." So having hobbies, having things that interest you, things that you're learning, cognitively sort of stimulating your brain, all of that not only contributes to like emotional well-being, but can combat brain fog. I am one of those people that started doing a lot of puzzles during the pandemic and have found that to be good for me, right? So finding those things that interest you, that kind of get your brain working.
Just to sum this up real quick, in a lot of different models of therapy, they bring up that one of the best ways to combat a lot of mental health pathology and problems is by having activities in your life that lead to a sense of mastery. Kind of going off of what you were saying there, Kim, that if you have something that you have a starting point and you can build a sense of accomplishment as well as getting better at it and seeing that level of mastery develop, it helps overall with mental health.
Thank you. I think your responses both kind of tied into the next question, that was how people can feel more connected in this environment, where previously workplaces were a place for social connections. And any additional thoughts or comments on how to kind of fill that gap that's been created by remote working?
Yeah, just a few quick points. Be open in your communication with leadership and letting them know of your needs. If you're feeling isolated, openly communicate that. Say, you know what, I'm not feeling connected with my team. Could we try to address this and start looking at creative ways to do that? Maybe even looking at having meetings that are just focused on that. We're not focused on productivity, other things. It's just team building exercises, even if it has to be remote. There's a lot of ideas online that you can look up that we won't get into today about how to do that. But I would say start scheduling out and having opportunities to build a team like that.
Yeah, I would say this is like really important, especially if you're in kind of a supervisory or leadership role, that this is really intentional. And it's hard and it's not the same, and people have Zoom burnout and whatever that is. But if you are a fully virtual team, it has to be a really purposeful process of building in connection. So, and I think it starts with like onboarding, right? If you're bringing somebody in new to a team, fully virtual, like having kind of, onboarding buddies, or, setting up regular one-on-ones with people throughout the whole office, or within the teams regularly. I think if you're a meeting facilitator, there's a lot of good information out there around how to meaningfully, purposefully set up meetings to increase a sense of connection and a sense of inclusion. And the reality is that this just takes a lot of intentionality and attention to, but I think it's really critically important, especially because, we are not going to go back to the same type of workplace that we had before. Even when we reach kind of an endemic place, like there's still going to be virtual work. We as a state are able to bring in people from other parts of the state into workplaces that we hadn't before with some of this. So that will continue. And so this is really a core leadership skill and responsibility for all of us to think about how we increase that connection. So it might be you take sort of, I'm a big like Brene Brown fan. And so she talks about how at the start of all of her meetings, they each take two words to talk about how they're feeling right now, or to describe their weekend, or, whatever it is, just those moments of like building in time to connect is not only important, but I think it's our responsibility.
Great, thank you. Some of our participants want to know how they could effectively support others having mental or emotional difficulty. Questions like, what do I do if someone tells me they're struggling? Or how do I start a conversation if I'm worried about someone?
Yeah, so those are great questions. I think the first one, what to do if someone is struggling or they tell you they're struggling. I think the first and the core skill to implement at that point is validation, right? Being able to know how to validate somebody's experience and what they're going through listening, reflecting. And I think it's important to know that, validation is not agreeing with or saying simply, I agree with what you're saying, or you're absolutely right. All right. Like, yeah, our boss is a jerk. That's not necessarily validating. Oftentimes my favorite approach to it is validating the validatable, right? And if there is something that can be validated, go with that. Say, you know what, that's a great point. You're right. That is hard. But at the end of the day, emotions are always a good go-to as well. You can always validate somebody's emotion by saying, I can see where that would be frustrating. Brene Brown was already brought up by Kim. She's got some great points on empathy. And I think that empathy versus sympathy, anyone, for time's sake, you're welcome to look it up on YouTube. But that's a great idea and concept to internalize as well. Being able to, identify, am I characterizing empathy right now or sympathy? Meaning, to put in a nutshell, am I being with this person? Am I sitting in this uncomfortable space that they're in? Or am I just kind of peeking in and being like, well, that sucks, and then moving on my way? And then I think after validation, it really depends on your relationship with the individual. One thing that I'll just plug in really quick, because there's a lot we could talk about, is just the idea of having both validation and supportive change talk in the conversation. You can both validate somebody saying, yeah, that's really hard. And you can find ways to be like, so let's see what we can do about this. Let's see what our options are. It doesn't have to be dichotomous where it's either or. Either you're validating somebody or you're helping them identify ways they can approach it. You can have both in the same conversation. And I think that can be really helpful. Oh, and then how do you start a conversation with somebody you're worried about? I'll just bring up one quick point. I think try to stick with facts and observations and avoid assumptions. So what I mean by that is being able to go and say, I noticed that recently you have been having a hard time getting your projects in, or I've noticed recently that you've been really struggling getting back to work, or I've noticed that you've been talking a lot about a family member that passed away. And then being able to ask the question of like, is there anything I can do? Or, how can I help you in this time? But if you're able to stick with the fact, something observable, rather than just saying, oh man, your spouse recently passed away, that must suck, or that must be terrible. Just stick with the observable. Wow, your wife passed away. How are you doing? Are you okay? Can I help you? I think starting with the observable before going with any assumptions is really important. And then if sticking where they're at, if they want to talk about it, and this is an important one, if you are willing to be in that space with them, then proceed with it. But if that's not something you're ready to do, see if you can just direct them towards services, supportive leadership, or Blomquist Hale therapists, wherever they might need the support to move forward with getting what they need.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time. There's another question that many people asked, goes like, in this age of personal attacks and psychological assaults, what advice do you have for people confronting these situations, whether family or general public? Is there a way to stay engaged and healthy in a toxic environment?
Just like collectively want to apologize for anybody who's being attacked. Like that's not the approach we should have, right? But for this, I would go back to kind of boundary setting. So we exist in a time of incredible polarization. So the practice of boundary setting is really a critical skill for all of us. And I would argue that we don't want to just exist in like an echo chamber. And so boundaries are a tool for maintaining relationships or the ability to work in difficult environments, like generally, right? So the other thing I'll say is just because somebody is in your family or just because you love someone or you work with them, it doesn't mean that they have unfettered access to you or your physical and emotional energy. So boundary setting gives us that tool to manage that as best as we can. So the first step is to really define your boundaries, right? That might be around how much time you spend on certain topics or what is on the table for discussion or the type of settings that you're willing to engage with somebody in, and really sort of going in and writing down what are your boundaries so that you have kind of a clear path forward for protecting yourself, right? And then after you decide your boundaries, we need to be direct in communicating them with folks. So this can be done in a calm, compassionate way most of the time. And really practicing sort of empathy through active listening to whatever the response might be. Obviously, in this situation, there's going to be differences in opinions. So for example, if you say your children who are unvaccinated are not going to be able to spend time indoors with unvaccinated family members, a family member might be really upset about that and say something like, how dare you not want them to be with me? That's so selfish, or whatever that might look like. And then, I turn around and say something like, I understand that you have the ability to make the decision not to be vaccinated for yourself. And I hope in turn that you understand that I have to make my decisions based on sort of protecting my kids or family, right? About the risk and safety of my kids. And I understand you're upset and that we will miss spending more time with you. And hopefully we can find ways to be together that feel safe, and hopefully this freaking pandemic will end at some point, right? So, just kind of talking about it from kind of an active listening, understanding why they're upset about the boundary, but then being firm in what you need to do. This isn't about right or wrong, like approaching boundary setting or differences of opinions around I'm right, you're wrong doesn't actually get us anywhere, even though it's really easy to approach these situations like that. There's just not a benefit in that. So focus on your core values, try to avoid judgment, and try to find common ground. But if you are being attacked or physically assaulted, you can lead that conversation and take whatever break you need from that relationship. You don't have to justify it. And if there's a question of your psychological safety and well-being, even if it's a really important relationship, you're allowed to not engage in it anymore. And I know that's painful and there's an incredible loss with that. But I hope there's permission to really take care of your emotional well-being.
Thank you. So we are at the top of the hour. Any final thoughts from Curtis or Kim before we conclude this?
I would just say, a lot of these questions, we as therapists, we are happy to try to help where we can. I know there was even one we weren't able to get to this time about how can I find hope, right? How can I manage that? And boy, that comes up a lot. And there are some really cool techniques and strategies to help with those kind of concerns and just feeling that negativity that seems to be going out there. It's just ongoing. So I would say, please, if these things are impacting you, schedule with a therapist. We're here to help you. There's even legal and financial counseling things that we can help you get linked to move forward with that. So please just be aware of that. And even if you're not sure, like, would a therapist help me with this? Just schedule. Come talk to us. We'll help you. And again, even if we can't, we'll find links and services to people who can.
Yeah, I just would say, look out for each other, look out for yourself, reach out if you're struggling. If you see somebody struggling, expressing care and concern is a great thing to do. And, use this opportunity of this extra time off to do something that nurtures you, that feeds your well-being. I think it's hard. We're in this together, and I hope that we can really, increase our opportunities to take care of each other. I think collective care and self-care are really critical.
Thank you. I appreciate you both being here and answering these questions and for your expertise. I appreciate all who have been in attendance for participation. Again, this recording will be made available on the Center for Excellence website, along with some additional resources and the websites and resources mentioned during the webinar. So again, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day.